Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for The Ladder of Leadership, Key Competencies That Determine Leadership Success, sponsored by SuccessFinder. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that this webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI credit and can also be used for SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. After the webcast, you'll receive an email from HR.com within 1 to 2 business days that will include your certification credit information. You can also log into HR.com and go to your View My Credits page where you can see the credits that you've received. If you have any questions today for our presenters or for HR.com, please type them into the Questions tab on your GoToWebinar control panel. Typically, you'll find that at the right side of your screen, and we'll be sure to follow up with you. And it's my pleasure now to turn you over to Lisa Hartley.
Hey, thanks so much, Sylvie, and welcome everyone. I just wanted to take a quick moment to introduce you to our company and team. My name is Lisa Hartley, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer. And SuccessFinder may be a new name for you, but our behavioral assessment test has been used and validated for over 35 years. It is the most sophisticated tool on the market for mapping out core behaviors. We call it behavioral DNA. In late 2016, we rebranded the company and brought our test platform to the cloud. Part of the value of having deep longitudinal data that you can get when you've been at this for a few decades is our ability to bring out compelling insights. And our research team, headed by Dr. Laurence Crevier-Braud, who is on the screen, hello, is gonna be so excited to share this 2-year research study with you. And you'll be hearing all about the conclusions by Dr. Carolyn Haas. Carolyn is our product director and also part of Laurence's research team. And not only is she going to be sharing you the Ladder of Leadership findings, but hopefully will also bring some great insights around the impact that it can have on your own leadership practices. So in the background, Laurence and I will be taking your online questions, and I'll be moderating a conversation at the end of the webcast. So with that, take it away, Carolyn. We're very excited, and yay!
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. I'm going to switch off my video, but you should continue to be able to hear me.
And Carolyn, we do need to go to the next slide.
Yes. So that was us. Thanks, Lisa, for the intro, and we are so excited to be presenting to you all today. So I'm going to get right into it, start a little slow, but what is a ladder of leadership? So at a high level, it's a behavioral competency model for driving the highest performance in 3 key corporate areas of leadership. So first intermediate level, senior level, and C-level management roles. With our research findings, this model offers a data-driven framework to better understand high performers at each level of leadership, as well as how to target their development in order to maximize their potential impact. So how did we get started on this project? The research team had 2 main objectives. One was to understand high performer role profiles at each level. What this means is, what behaviors characterize an exceptional manager or an exceptional executive? Basically, what does success look like at each of these leadership levels from a behavioral point of view? Our second objective, what does it take to successfully transition from one level to the next? So specifically, when stretching an employer, growing a leader, what is the behavioral shift required to move successfully from one level to the next? Ultimately, the findings in this research really aim to help organizations, HR, and leaders use a data-driven leadership framework to better understand how to target development opportunities, provide the right stretch assignments to high potential individuals, and help individuals understand and leverage their strengths in their current level to increase their leadership impact. So I'm going to start off with a quick poll to warm you guys up before we get into all the details. This poll starts off with a question: do you use behavioral assessment tools in succession planning or promotion decisions? So you should see the poll question and your ability to answer. I will wait for your responses.
Sylvie, can you start the poll? There you go. Thank you.
All right, results are coming in. So most of you have voted, and I see a majority, about a third of you said yes, 2/3 said no. So this is pretty interesting to me. This is something that is becoming really important in what we call strategic talent decision making. So what is the person's natural style as assessed through behavioral assessment, and how can that adapt to this leadership context that you are planning to put them in? How about one more poll to help me get to know all of you? What enticed you to join our webcast today? Succession planning, career pathing, professional development, maybe just intellectual curiosity. So I will wait for the results to come in. So far, professional development is in the lead. Yeah, looks like about 2/3 of you are here for professional development, which is really interesting. So a lot of people here either trying to see how they can use this in their own roles or even for their own career progression. We'll have a chance to talk a bit more about that as well. So before we get started, like in any research study results, I will go over some of the methodology we used. So first of all, what was our sample? We looked at profiles of 1,003 high-performing managers, executives, and CEOs who have all taken the SuccessFinder, broken down across the 3 levels you see here. Something that's very important to remember, that while we have many leaders in our database who have taken SuccessFinder, the key to this research is that we looked specifically at those who were rated by their organizations as high or exceptional performers. This is really distinctive of our framework. When you compare your participants to these results, you aren't comparing them to just anyone. We're looking at the best of the best. We're strict here at SuccessFinder. So since this sample comes from different companies across industries, the performance criteria companies use to identify people as high performers can vary. But there were some minimum criteria that were established to ensure this consistency. So one is tenure. So we don't consider someone a high-performing manager if they've only stayed in that position for 6 months or a year before moving up. If they move quickly, that likely means they're a high-performing executive who had that potential. We want to refine what it takes to show long-term success at each level. So another is consistent managerial ratings. Not just people who had a good year but never remained at the top. We want a high average of several yearly performance reviews. In some cases, we were also able to get 360 feedback ratings. And something quite interesting, especially when we look at the C level, sometimes performance is a little harder to measure. There's business performance and growth, but sometimes there are special designations or awards that can add to someone being considered a high performer. Now let's talk about the data we collected on our sample besides their performance level. In addition to technical skills, academic background, and professional experience acquired, natural behavioral tendencies are key elements to achieving success at work. Behavioral tendencies make up a person's unique behavioral profile, or DNA, and that's what SuccessFinder measures. It allows us to capture natural preferences on 85 distinct behavioral traits, which combine into 26 competencies. The competencies are going to be used in the ladder of leadership that you'll see today. This is really helpful to our framework because we want to get really targeted on what distinguishes high performance at each level. the more specific our data is, the more nuanced our results will be. So once we have this data on each leader in our sample, we look at what each level has in common. Because what we're looking for is the behavioral recipe, or as we like to call it, the secret sauce, for success at each level of leadership. On top of that, we compare the different groups to ensure consistency, that there are no gaps, and we did a final cross-validation to ensure the results fit with expert model benchmarks we have in our database on each of the 3 levels of leadership. This is what builds a high performer role profile. And in just a moment, we'll share what that looks like at each level of our ladder. It's important to remember this is a framework for understanding leadership levels. It's more broad than, say, what it takes to be a high-performing VP of marketing in the retail industry, for example. That being said, there are still commonalities that came through quite strongly across high performers at each level, no matter the industry, company size, or division. So how about a quick check-in for all of you out there before we get into it. When assessing leadership styles, does your organization currently use a competency framework? Do you have an internal ladder of leadership or leadership competency profile that you use? Results are coming in. Looks like a familiar split of about 2/3. A little less than 2/3 said no. A little more than 1/3 said yes. So it's interesting. A lot of companies out there aren't necessarily using a specific framework for understanding leadership fit, but more and more are starting to do so. All right, let's get to the good stuff. The results of our research and SuccessFinder's ladder of leadership. Now, don't worry, I will do a deep dive on each level and then some. But to help you follow along, here is the overview. So out of the 26 competencies measured by SuccessFinder, what we found were 9 first intermediate level competencies, 10 senior level competencies, and 10 C-level competencies. The color coding is important here, and we're going to go through it in the next slides as well. In orange, you see what we call 2 fundamental leadership competencies. These are shared across all 3 levels. In gray, and you'll see light gray and dark gray, it's what we call bridging competencies. These looked to be important, not just at one level, but at the level above. And in blue, competencies that are only distinctive of one level of leadership. So this means that they are only key to distinguishing high performance at one level, and you won't find them at another level on the ladder. So across all levels, we found 2 fundamental competencies that distinguish high-performing leaders: leads decisively and thrives in chaos. So what does this mean? No matter what your level of leadership, as soon as you go from an individual contributor to a people manager, these 2 competencies start to make a difference between good and great. And this makes a lot of sense. With the increasing complexity and unpredictability of market realities, organizational contexts, leading decisively and thriving in chaos mean that leaders must maintain a high level of efficiency even in an unstructured, chaotic environment, one that's unpredictable. This is all about multitasking, dealing with urgencies as they come, and generally operating at a really fast pace. Amidst all of this, with leads decisively, you have to be comfortable being in charge and making difficult decisions in an assertive and resolute way to keep things moving forward. This is key no matter what your level of leadership. Really, these 2 competencies highlight what being the boss is all about: taking decisive action efficiently in a fast-paced, chaotic environment. So I like to say, that's what it means. That's being the boss, and what you'll hear me say quite a bit, that's the job. So one more poll, why not? Do the 2 basic leadership competencies that our research revealed surprise you? Take it to the polls. Results are coming in. And I see a lot of no's. Not a lot of you are surprised. We weren't surprised either. It makes a lot of sense. If you're going to be in charge, whether you're a manager or you're a CEO, you have to be very comfortable leading decisively and thriving in the chaotic environment. So it's very, very interesting, but not counterintuitive results that came through in our research. All right. Now let's look at each level individually. Before we look at the behaviors that characterize the first intermediate level of management, this is what I call the answer, we need to return to the question, what's the job? What does a first or intermediate level manager do? And you'll notice we just described this by level, not with a specific title, because this can really vary from organization to organization. Titles can sometimes be a bit misleading. So what we're really looking for is a description of this level of management that can sort of cross different role designations that organizations may have. So what's the job? Most would agree that managers make sure the day-to-day tasks get carried out and that projects are moving forward. They closely manage the activities of their team. Really, they need to rally the troops. To do this, they align with and communicate directions and decisions taken one level above, and even more importantly, they're able to build a common understanding of the tasks and projects to be accomplished with the members of their team. So obviously this is a broad description, but in general, that's what this level of management is responsible for. So what came through in our research in terms of the behaviors that drive success at this level was very interesting. Obviously, the fundamental competencies in orange came through. Being the boss means leading decisively and thriving in chaos. Most of you agreed with me on that. So being certain, resolute, assertively taking a managerial role when others are not acting with the same work ethic and a sense of accountability, that's a big part of being a first intermediate level manager. In gray, you'll see competencies that characterize both this level and senior level management. Reasoning critically and thinking conceptually, so 2 of the competencies in gray here, these are problem-solving styles that combine common sense and analytical approaches to solving everyday problems, but with a depth of understanding of the underlying concepts to solve them at their source. This is interesting because it offers practical and pragmatic solutions that are feasible to implement, which is very characteristic of this level as well. We also see overcomes adversity and demonstrates character. This is interesting. High performers at this level have an internal discipline, willpower, and resourcefulness to completing their tasks, regardless of personal likes or dislikes for that task. And on top of that, they have strong principles and forthrightness that allows them to do the right thing and convey that trustworthiness to their direct reports. Finally, in blue, very unique to this level, meaning you won't see these competencies distinguishing high performers anywhere else on this ladder, communicating clarity. So this is about demonstrating a persuasive and clear communication style to ensure that everyone understands what they need to do. It's about naturally presenting ideas well and comfortably, regardless of the group being addressed. We also see building consensus and maintaining accountability. This is about encouraging everyone's contributions in a team during meetings, making sure voices are heard and promoting that shared understanding. And maintaining accountability points to a natural style of seeking out and even taking on additional responsibility and ownership for what is being promised. Shouldering that accountability, maybe even for the work of others outside of one's immediate span of control. Again, that's the job. So very interesting how when we described the job earlier in terms of responsibilities, what comes through in these distinctive behaviors is really, really quite well linked to what we just talked about. Now let's look at the senior level management. So here we would have executives, VPs, whatever you may call them. But again, we're going to want to describe this in terms of what is the job. Executives formulate and implement the strategic plan that guides the direction of the business of their area of responsibility. And what's very interesting here is they typically exercise leadership with regards to other leaders. So they manage not just one team, but maybe a team of managers and directors who themselves manage several teams. This is something that you can see is a significant responsibility in the organization, getting to that senior level of management. So let's see how this translated into behaviors in our research. So there are 10 competencies at this level. Once again, we see the fundamental competencies here: leading decisively and thriving in chaos. That is always the job. Then in gray, competencies that are important at the first, intermediate, and the senior level. So we talked about reasoning critically and thinking conceptually. But here, if we look at it through the lens of senior leaders, executives grasp the underlying complexity of a problem and have to have the foresight to uncover complications that may not be obvious at first, but that could return to impact the business later. So a lot of that analysis serves more towards preventing problems before they occur rather than just handling day-to-day problems. As for demonstrates character and overcomes adversity, senior managers demonstrate a high level of integrity, are very straightforward, and have that no-nonsense, disciplined approach to the workplace to ensure delivery on what they say they will do. Now we have one new competency that is distinctive of this level: manages stress. Senior level executives, high performers in our sample, appear to cope effectively with the stresses of the workplace. They're at their best when under the gun of tight deadlines or other external pressures, and they can withstand the high risks, high stakes associated with the responsibility at this level. Finally, at the top, 3 new competencies that will continue to be important at the C level: demonstrates energetic enthusiasm, focuses on results. If you look at these, high-performing senior level executives have a natural and consistently high stamina. They have a lot of physical and mental energy that allows them to handle the intensity of work at this level and the industrious effort required. They're highly dedicated to their careers and to driving the execution of large initiatives. And with inspires others, they're excellent at promoting the company philosophy and rationale of the business. They're able to persuasively sell their ideas and instill confidence in their abilities in the eyes of others. So looking at this, what's interesting again is how the profile has shifted. It's not a complete 180 from the manager profile. There's some overlap, but there are some distinctive competencies that fit this new list of responsibilities of a senior leader, and some very interesting resilience factors that come through at this level. And what I like to say when I see this, well, it shouldn't shock all of us that managing stress is key here. That's a big part of this job. Finally, the C level. So whether you're a CEO, a COO, a CFO, there's a certain responsibility at the top that constitutes the job. C-levels are the starters, the innovators, the drivers of the organization. They define and set ambitious objectives, they identify opportunities, and launch initiatives to turn them into a reality. They're the external, outward-facing representative of the interests of the organization, and they have to manage the complex interests of different stakeholders within and outside the organization. This is really at the top of the pyramid. This is the job. Here's how it looks in terms of behaviors. So you have the same 2 fundamental competencies. They're still important. If anything, they're even more important. When you look at the 3 gray competencies that were important at the previous level, focuses on results, demonstrates energetic enthusiasm, so still that impressive work ethic and stamina, inspires others, a really charismatic presence that allows them to establish a quick rapport with others, internal and external to the business, But what's most interesting here is a big shift. There are 5 new competencies distinctive of this level, the most at any level. And this is very interesting when you think of what the C level represents. So we see seeks innovation and exercising political influence. Individuals at the C level are intuitive thinkers. Their problem-solving style is to rely on inner judgment to provide a sense of direction and to come up with new, untried ideas. They also have to read between the lines when dealing with people, enabling them to be street smart and resourceful when necessary. We also see drives achievement and initiates independently. C-level leaders possess an intense drive to constantly pursue greater and greater challenges, and they have to lead their executive leadership team to develop ambitious, innovative projects to always be able to surprise and surpass the competition. They prefer to act on their own and are proactive when there are entrepreneurial opportunities without initiating independently. Finally, sustaining profitability. So they're really the keepers of the profitability of the organization. Their high profit awareness makes them easily recognize and act on financial opportunities. For them, every decision or action has a profit and loss factor built into it, and this is really in their bones. So very interesting to see the competencies that came through here, and again, the flavor that it gives to this level in terms of what drives the highest level of success. So there you have it. Our first objective was really to capture the high performer role profiles at each level. Now, one last poll to make sure you're all still with me before we cover the last leg of this presentation. How confident are you about the leadership promotion decisions being made in your company today? This is an interesting one, a tricky decision to make because it involves predicting what someone's future performance will be. The polls will be opened. So I see results coming in. About 40% semi-confident, 40% somewhat confident, 20% not that confident, and we have just a small amount that say very confident. So I think there's some of you out there that have, or at least see some room for improvement in how some of these decisions are being made in your company today. And this is really interesting for our second research objective, which was to understand leadership transitions. We know what it takes to perform at one level, but what if you're moving up? Or what if you want to move up? Or what if you can't move up, but you should? A leadership transition isn't just about new responsibilities. It's a whole new set of behaviors that become key to success. Let's look at the first transition. So when you're transitioning to a senior level, what do you need to leave behind? What do you need to focus on? This was really interesting when we saw the research results. If you look at what characterizes first intermediate level, the behaviors that are only found here, you see 3 competencies that represent what we'll call proximal management. Managers are proximal with their teams. They manage the day-to-day activities. They need to be close to them. They have a lot of meetings, a lot of time one-on-one. The focus is on accountability for themselves and their team at the task level. Communication is key to the transmission and interpretation of the organizational direction into day-to-day operations. And that consensus building, making sure there's a shared understanding that everyone follows along and is moving in the same direction is so important. But when we look at the next level up, these behaviors are replaced. Hopefully this isn't shocking, but executives don't have as much time for one-on-ones and frequent team meetings. Yet they still need to inspire followership without being there all the time. It's about inspiration. It's about a presence, even when you're not there. And what's really interesting is the 3 other competencies you see here: energetic enthusiasm, managing stress, a focus on results. The intensity of the workload and the level of responsibility at this level requires energy, dedication, and resilience. New behaviors that continue to be important at the executive and CEO levels. The volume just got turned up at this level, and you need to make sure you're thriving in, not just surviving, that pressure. The C level, so when you transition from the senior level to the C level, you have a similar transition of what do you need to leave behind and what do you need to focus on more. So what's really interesting here is reasoning critically and thinking conceptually that you saw at the senior level. These were behaviors that were important to help concentrate on understanding the deep issues and solving setbacks, managing urgencies by understanding deeply the problems that are coming up. They're really about driving execution down. When we look at the C level, it's a whole other game. This is not just about driving strategy execution, but about defining the strategy and the direction of the business. The C-level's interest isn't on going deep on issues, but rather how the issues will affect the strategy, the organizational goals, and the agenda for change. The landscape at this level is less black and white, and C-levels need to always be ready to identify potential threats to organizational growth and to negotiate accordingly. They must read and understand the hidden interests of others as they negotiate with competitors and external partners. So something that's really interesting here when you think of these two levels is it's not that the job is less intense or less stressful, that you don't need managers stress, what you see here at the senior level, but it's just not as characteristic over some of these other behaviors that really make that difference between good and great. So it's a really interesting transitional framework here when you see that what worked at one level isn't always going to be the key to success at the next level above. Now, something I also want to add in here, because we get this question a lot. What should the target be? What does it mean to be a high performer at any level? How do you know if a level is right? How many competencies should a leader be strong on to be considered a high performer? So this is a very interesting question. And something that becomes very important here is how feasible is it to find rock stars who will fire on all cylinders on a level? And even if they do, you can't be high on everything. It's not possible. So a more realistic perspective, one that reflects what you're likely to see, even with high performers, is about 4 or more competencies in a level. That's a strong profile. This means that about half the competencies that will make up your success come naturally to you. And maybe there are 2 or 3 that require more effort to build. Nobody's perfect, but that's a good ratio for you to still thrive at this level. That being said, if you are in line for the C level, for example, and you only have 1 or 2 behaviors that come naturally to you, this will be a big shift for you, and you will feel it. And this doesn't mean that you won't be successful at this level, or that we're trying to say that you will not be able to do well and you should just give up if your profile doesn't match perfectly. But what it means is be very mindful that these behaviors are less natural to you, and there's going to be some more effort required for you to be comfortable at this level. And that's really the key here. So a less optimal fit with a level is something that just will require some extra effort, some more development to make sure that you feel as though you're thriving in that area. So there you have it. A great way to summarize our findings is what got you here won't get you there. And that's something that was very interesting to us when we started off this research to understand the different levels of leadership, but particularly when we saw the transition that occurred and how that led to a shift in behaviors. So what we set out to do and what we have done is to highlight fundamental leadership competencies at all levels, pinpoint competencies that change during transitions, and generate some role-specific insights at each management level. So something interesting to be able to take back to your organizations is this kind of a model can really help identify high potential employees for succession planning or for talent management initiatives, and even provide a basis for meaningful career pathing 1, 2, or 3 moves ahead. So I know a lot of you said you came here for some professional development. Hopefully that's something that we provided you with, some new insights on leadership behaviors and leadership transitions. And I want to thank you all for your great attention today.
Thank you, Carolyn. First of all, great session, and congrats to you and the whole research team for a job very well done. Just everyone on the call, we will be sending you a link to the research after this webcast if you haven't already downloaded it. If you're interested in more information on our leadership programs, you can certainly visit our website. And we have a really interesting focus right now on emerging women leaders with our consulting partner, Optimum Talent. So if that's a particular hot button for you, I would encourage you to go check that out. If you have other specific needs about your company, organization, or personal development, you're also welcome to contact us at info@successfinder.com, and we'll absolutely route you to the right person or the right research. So at this time, I want to go ahead and open it up to Q&A. You guys, we had close to 500 folks on this webcast, so the great news is we got lots of wonderful questions. Laurence and Joanne and I have been going through them. What I'm going to try to do is to get through as many of these as I can, and then Laurence, please jump in if for some reason I missed one and you want to go ahead and bring it up. So a couple of questions, Carolyn or Laurence, around the competencies themselves. Donna asks, a couple here, does leads decisively equal controlling others? And then secondarily, she says, managing stress. Is this about managing stress in the decision-making environment or just within the leaders sort of themselves, their personal stress? Can you give us some insights there?
Sure, I'll take that one, and that's a really great question. So it's all about how, of course, we measure and define these competencies. For leads decisively, so earlier I mentioned that our competencies are a combination of traits that we measure. And leading decisively is a mix of 3 traits. In it, you have assertion. So this is the ability to push back. And that's not necessarily a hard shove, but it's still standing firm and asserting one's position. Along with that, you have a natural preference for decisiveness. So this means it's actually easy and natural for you to call a shot when a shot needs to be called. You're less likely to hesitate. You'd prefer that a decision be made and that you make it than for someone else to make it or for no decision to be taken at all. So it's really about decisive, assertive action. But there is a final ingredient, which is comfort with being in power, in a position of authority. So it's not about control, but if you're the boss, you are in a position of authority. You are in charge, more or less. So that's why I mentioned sort of that saying, that's what being the boss is all about, is that if you're in charge, you're going to be the one who's accountable for making a quick decision on the spot and asserting that position with your team. For the
managing stress piece of it.
Yeah, so the second piece around managing stress, that's really interesting. It's not just the stress of making decisions. Managing stress is really how naturally, physiologically prone are you to stress. So some people can be triggered very easily by stress. A lineup at Starbucks, too much traffic, and suddenly their stress juices are flowing. Not only that, another ingredient in managing stress as we measure it is also being a bit more prone to worrying and anxiety. So catastrophizing situations. If I worry about it, maybe it's less likely to happen. And even being too sensitive to criticism. So a lot of this can create less resilience to some of the high pressure and high intensity of a senior leader's job, which is to take all of this with a certain amount of calm, to not react too physiologically. And obviously there are a ton of stress management techniques and that are very effective for this. But what we saw in our research is that people who had a much higher threshold for stress in general, it seemed to come through in our high performer sample.
Super. Carolyn, thank you. Laurence, I don't know if you want to take this one, but Isabel asked, what is the first step in moving to the next level?
The first step in moving to the next level, meaning how do you decide to move to the next level?
Yeah, or maybe if somebody is, not looking to stretch, what are ways that they can do that to know that they can be successful in the next level for them?
Absolutely. So that's a really great question. Sometimes you're thrust into the next level, but a great way to prepare for the next level is to look at some of the behaviors you see here and see if you have the opportunity to demonstrate them in your day-to-day. So sometimes we get questions of, how do you determine what an appropriate stretch assignment is for someone? And some of that can be purely experiential. You can put someone on a project for something they've never done before. But a lot of it can also be more on the behavioral side. So handling something that is a little bit more of a delicate political situation with stakeholders, for example, if we see the C-level with exercises political influence. Or if, for example, you're much more of a reasons critically, thinks conceptual type of thinker, and you really like to get down to the heart of problems, you can start to practice some more innovative or intuitive thinking. How do you handle situations when you don't have all the facts and when you need to rely on your gut? And this can be something that is a lot more difficult for people to do, but that if they start to get comfortable with it early on, it'll really help them prepare for the next level.
Super, thanks, Carolyn. This is a great question, and I'm going to butcher your name, Timatope. But this individual asked, what approach can be taken to convince business leaders or startup companies to take competency seriously as they approach leadership?
Great question. So, there's something really interesting here, and I noticed in the polls, of course, that it was maybe a little less present in some of the organizations of our attendees today. But something that becomes really interesting, and what we've been able to see, at least with SuccessFinder clients, is that behavior matters. It really does. If you look at some people, they have all the credentials, they have everything on paper, and what it will always come down to is behavior. And sometimes the fear is, well, we don't want to replace our entire program, things we've been working with for years, with something like behavior, which we're less used to. And that's where it's really important to introduce it as an additional data piece, not a replacement data piece, but something that can add to the conversation, that can add more nuance to what you're seeing. So if you have an executive who's considering a move for their direct report, they know this person, they've worked with them, they've seen them in action, they know their CV, they know them personally. This is really just adding an additional layer. Another piece that's really important when starting to consider behavioral competencies is there are some things that are hard to see in the day-to-day. Things like managing stress, a natural, cool, calm, extra chill person versus someone who has cultivated that over a lot of time and it's just waiting for a breaking point. That makes a difference, but it's not always easy to see. Someone using their intuitive judgment or someone who has a certain charisma, you can't always measure it just by looking at the person. So this is something that, again, it just adds an additional piece of information to inform some of those decisions without necessarily something too threatening like replacing it from one day to the next.
Thanks, Carolyn. Exactly. And I would just add, we talk a lot about the three-legged stool, and that being skills, experience, and behavior. And what we're doing, of course, today is focusing on that third leg. Clay asked, would you recommend these leadership models for vetting new employees?
So that's a very, very interesting question. And I would say you have to keep in mind that it's an additional piece of information. So if someone has a very specific role, for example, I'll use my same example, VP marketing in the retail industry, there are going to be specific competencies that are key for that role, for that industry, even for that company, to make sure you have a cultural fit. But I do recommend looking at these competencies to get an assessment of the person's leadership readiness. Where do they fit best? And some people really do have more of a manager-director profile. They're very hands-on. They like to be in the day-to-day with their team. So if you're planning to put them in a virtual environment where they won't spend very much time with their team, it's not very hands-on, people are very autonomous, that might not be their sweet spot and their fit, and they may not be as effective as they could be rather than in another environment. So I'd say, yes, it's important to look at it, but I don't consider it to be a go, no go for a hiring recommendation, for example.
Super. Hey, we've had a couple of different questions, one from Maureen and one from Esther, but they're essentially the same. You know, people are looking at specific competencies and saying, why don't they cut across all levels? And the two that are in question are focuses on results and maintains accountability. Why don't we see those two across all levels, like the fundamental competencies of leading decisively and thriving in chaos?
That's an excellent question. I'll start with maintains accountability. And this is one, again, I'm going to go back to how SuccessFinder measures this. Maintaining accountability, the way we measure it, is a lot more about feeling accountability. This is about taking on additional responsibility, not because you have to, but because you feel accountable and responsible for what is under your hat. And you're able to say, well, I don't drop the ball. If someone gave me something under my responsibility, even if someone else is tasked to do it, I still feel accountable to making sure it gets done. And that's something that is most characteristic of success at the first intermediate level. And it makes a lot of sense at this level because you have a lot more of a control and handle on your team directly. So obviously it's about feeling that accountability. Even when you don't have control, being able to shoulder that responsibility, you're really at the bottom, right? It stops with you. There's only one other level of people executing on this. At the senior level, or even at the C level, it's not so much that you no longer have responsibility or you don't need to feel responsible, but that responsibility has to be balanced. You can't shoulder the responsibility for something that happened 2 levels down, an immediate task that didn't go well. You have to stay a little bit more high level, and that level of personal pressure that maintains accountability can put on someone can be too overwhelming. And that's where you see some of the buffering competencies like energetic enthusiasm and even manage of stress that starts to become even more important. So remember, it's not that these behaviors won't help you, it's just that they're not distinctive of high performers at that level. And the other one I heard was focuses on results. Again, one that I would just specify with how we measure it. Focuses on results here is really about a full dedicated work ethic towards one's career. It's someone who enjoys hard work, who has no problems leaving work at the bringing work home with them or spending extra time working. It's really about hard workers who enjoy hard work for hard work's sake, if I can say it that way. And that's something that, again, we all want hard workers at every level of the ladder of leadership, but we see it most at senior and C levels rather than at the first level. It's not necessarily something that will make the difference between good to great at this level, even if it's important to be a hard worker. When you get to the senior level and C level, these are very, very intense jobs with a high amount of responsibility, and the accountability usually falls past the regular 9 to 5 working hours. That's the job, so it becomes particularly important.
Thank you, Carolyn. Couple, once again, there seems to be some themes here. Both Isabel and Donna asked about culture. Does culture have an impact on behavioral competencies around professional development? Or another way to ask the question, does our tool take into account the impact of cultural beliefs?
So by culture, do we mean more your organizational culture, or do we mean more your cultural background?
It doesn't specify in the question. So I'm thinking that I took it as cultural background, perhaps cultural environment, but perhaps you answer it both ways if you can.
So something that is interesting when you look at a sample like this, and it's something that we find very interesting as well, is there's a difference between sanctioned behaviors and things that are very important to a value system and that are kind of part of the culture you grew up with, versus behaviors that are natural to you, that characterize your personality, and that are going to make a difference when you're in charge of just a group of people, or when you're in charge of an entire division, or when you're in charge of an entire company. So I'd say something that we found interesting is there's not necessarily a cultural difference that comes through in these kinds of natural preferences when the overall job description remains the same. So remember, if we think of this just in terms of a level of leadership, it's more about your level of responsibility. And what we found was, if you're in charge and this is the scope of your responsibility, leading decisively is still important. Thriving in chaos is still important. In a different organization, in a different country, when you're in charge at this level, these things remain important.
Super, thank you. Once again, another theme here. What if I have a leader in my organization that is not in the right seat based on the competency profile that you present? And then another question said, what suggestions do you have for someone being thrust to the next level, but is not in the right seat or feels unprepared?
That's a really, really great question. I think that's on everyone's mind, right? Sometimes you have an opportunity that comes your way and you're supposed to reach out and grab it, and then you haven't really had the time to prepare for not just the responsibility, but even the shift in your behaviors. So I think something here that is really a theme in how SuccessFinder approaches it is self-awareness. First, you have to start by really knowing yourself well. What is your sweet spot? Where are you at your best? What are the things that really make you shine and let you give your best contribution to the workplace? And obviously, I mentioned this before, there's no perfect fit, but if you're going to prepare for a level that is a bit less suited to your natural style, be prepared for the behavioral shift that will challenge you, and also find a way to make it your own. You're not going to change who you are from one day to the next, and that is certainly not the goal. But it's more to observe some of the different ways that your work activities are changing, your responsibilities are changing, and how can you start to adapt your behavior as you ease into it. It's not something that will come overnight, but if you understand your baseline very well, you'll be able to recognize where you need to make adjustments, and that can be very helpful in starting to feel more comfortable. The second piece to this question is also, what if I don't want to move up? And this is an interesting debate. I don't know if we have time for it here, but there's a lot of this mentality of up or out, if you've heard that expression before. And some of the people I've spoken to, it's very interesting, and a new assessment that people give of themselves is, well, I'm actually really comfortable. I like to have a close team that I work with all the time. Is there a way that my organization can validate my high performance, if it's a more technical performance, without necessarily broadening my leadership responsibilities? So I won't necessarily get into that here, but I'd say it's definitely something worth exploring in your own organization. Is it more about increasing your leadership responsibilities, moving up the ladder? Or is it more about finding ways to stay with a small team, if that's what you're most comfortable with, while still being recognized for your achievements and your performance?
Absolutely, Carolyn. And I'm thinking, especially about your first point, we work with someone who had a very low patient score. but that does not mean that he was able to make great strides in the observed behavior of patients. So it was not a natural behavior, but he recognized it and was able to modify it because he needed to modify it based on his level within the organization.
Absolutely. Practice makes perfect.
Sandra asked, what advice do you have for implementing a leadership assessment model in a small to medium company?
Now that's very interesting. Depending on the size, obviously, it depends to what extent you have established HR practices that already exist. Usually in a younger company, there's nothing too formal, so it's easy to start to shift a little bit how you can integrate this kind of information. But I'd say a big part of it is it has to be part of your talent management philosophy. When you start doing something like this, you have to keep in mind you don't want to just assess everyone so that you have, a ton of results like at a doctor's visit. It has to be part of a framework that says we want to help you get to know yourself, know your leadership style. We're going to know more about leadership in our company, and also we're going to provide something for you to be able to do something about the results. That's really key, I would say, to success, whether you're a small or medium business or in larger organizations as well, though it takes a bit more time. It's really make sure that it's connected to an overall philosophy on leadership, an overall program that we want to know more about you so that we can help grow you as a leader and give you the tools you need, but you also have, your own career pathing responsibility to get to know yourself, find the areas that are most interesting to you, and make sure you can contribute.
Thank you, Carolyn. This is a kind of an interesting one. Again, another question around a specific competency. But are there suggestions that you have if someone is, and this is from Jill, sort of lacking in political influence? How do you improve or increase that competency?
That's another great question, and one that I get quite often because the less natural it is to you, the more you know what's going on, but maybe you're a bit, you're more of an authentic type, you have a lot of forthrightness and trustworthiness, and you just do what you say you're going to do, and you notice some political behaviors, and you know that you have to kind of get in the game. I say always start small. First, make sure your radar is on. A lot of people don't have their radar on, and they may miss some of these more political pieces going around. But one of the easiest ways to start to integrate some of this radar into your world, and this is a personal preference for development, is find people who are very natural at this and allow them to be part of what I call your personal advisory board. Sometimes you can leave a meeting and go to your colleague who's very, very savvy on this and get their take on what you may have missed, what you may not have read. And slowly you'll start to see what are some of the cues that they pick up on. And you can, again, practice this as you go through and see how you can be a little bit more careful, a little bit more savvy in this area, in a way that makes sense and that can give you the right impact you desire. But always start slow and start by turning your radar on, and make sure you have someone in your camp who can help you navigate this at the start.
Great, thank you, Carolyn. And I'll just end, Andrew had a question around, is the model available that lists the distinct traits? And yes, Andrew, I would suggest the white paper is great. It's not super long, but we tried to make it very readable, and it will give you some more information on the individual traits. And it is the top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I also just want to, again, reiterate Carolyn Laurent's fantastic research. Hopefully everyone on the call felt like this was useful. I certainly did. I had a great time. And once again, if we did not answer your specific questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@successfinder.com. And I just hope everyone has a great day. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
And on behalf of HR.com, I'd like to thank you very much, SuccessFinders and our terrific presenters today, for educating our audience. We appreciate you sharing your knowledge. Just a few reminders to our attendees. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archive recording and slides will be available for up to 7 days for our free members, and our certification members have unlimited access. All webcast credits are stored in your HR.com account. Watch for your HR.com email to arrive within 1 to 2 business days, and that will have your certification credit information in it as well. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that will appear on your screen once the webcast has ended. This is also another place where you could submit your questions to our presenters or to HR.com. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.